From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Recovery of victims is complete as the Wichita community continues to mourn those killed in last week's devastating air disaster. Also, the Kansas legislature is considering a bill to allow local officials to inspect the condition of rental property. But first, Kansans take to the streets to protest Trump administration policies on immigration, transgenderism, and other issues. We'll consider the practical and emotional impact of those policies locally on this edition of Kansas Week. A nationwide effort this week encouraged protests at state capitals and other locations across the country. The barrage of policy changes coming out of the Trump administration has some Kansans worked up over a number of issues. Chief among them, immigration and transgender rights. Cake's Kate Devine filed this report.
When you think of Salina, Kansas, large protests aren't usually the first thing that comes to mind. But Sunday, people gathered to speak out.
Think of it like this: if Jesus Christ was to walk this earth today and is being an immigrant that's not from the U.S., would you invite him here?
Tony Evans joined the demonstration in Salina to spread a message of unity.
Together we stand, divided we fall. We shouldn't let this country divide us based on what somebody else looks like, sounds like, nationality, creed, sex. Love people, regardless of what they look like and or sound like.
Protesters in Kansas joined a national movement this weekend, challenging the Trump administration's immigration policies and other proposed changes.
We want to bring attention to, everybody's rights. We're all humans. We're all in this together, and we don't like you said. We're not trying to seclude everybody. We're all united, and so we're divided. And hopefully, more division doesn't happen. I mean, our voices are small, but our numbers are big.
Immigrants make America great. While immigration enforcement was a key concern, demonstrators also protested legislation impacting the LGBTQ+ community, including a proposal to restrict access to gender-affirming health care for transgender individuals.
I went with no sign is big enough to list all the reasons I'm here. I'm a queer woman, and I worry about our rights, and as a queer person and as a woman, what is the future going to look like for us? It's so much easier to tear this stuff down than it is to build it back up, and that's the frightening part for me.
Just an hour south in Wichita, another protest took place, focused primarily on immigration rights.
Just us supporting the Mexican community and everything. I don't know, it's impressive. Feels good. See that a lot of people coming together on stuff.
So many showed up at the Wichita demonstration that it turned into an informal parade along 21st Street in Wichita's historic Latino community, causing traffic backups for blocks. As political tensions rise nationwide, protesters here say their message is clear. They want their voices heard. Kate Devine, Cake News, on your side.
Here to discuss this and some of the other big stories of the week is Wichita Eagle opinion editor Dion Leffler, former state representative and now KNSS radio host John Whitmer, and we have Democrat State Senator David Haley from Kansas City, who is joining us by Zoom. Thank you all for joining us today. Dion, I'll start with you. One of the people that was being interviewed there said it's not about what people look and sound like. Is that really what it's about, though? Is it about what people look like and what people sound like, or is there something else?
Well, no, I think it is about what people look like and sound like. I never thought that I would live in the United States of America, where the major party supports the restoration of the Soviet Union and yet is terrified of fruit pickers and hotel maids. But here we are.
John Whitmer, tell me your thoughts. Is it really about what people look and sound like? Because it seems to me that's not what it's really about. Well, it's about, you explain it to me.
Well, that's because it's not what that's about. And I'm sorry to disagree with my friend Dion, but he's an editorializer for a reason. It's what he's paid to do.
So what is it about?
But that's hyperbole. It's about immigration status and coming here legally. The gentleman in the piece said, he referred to Jesus, and would we welcome Jesus? And absolutely we would welcome Jesus if he came here legally. It's about immigrants who come here legally. America is a nation of immigrants, but you need to come here the right way. And that's what we want. We want immigrants. We want them to come here legally and do the right thing, come here the right way, come through the process, come here and follow our laws. If you don't, well, then there are consequences for your actions. And that's the only thing that Donald Trump is trying to do. Look, you know, people talk about having immigrant rights. Well, what about the rights of Lake and Riley? What about the rights of people who've been harmed by these criminals, Trende de Agua, you know, the migrant criminals who are committing crimes? That's what this is about. It's not about fruit pickers. It's about criminals committing crimes who then need to be held accountable for their actions.
Senator
that is such a dodge.
It's the truth,
It is
Dion.
not the truth.
We're not talking
First of all,
about,
we're talking
nobody is kicking
undocumented
migrant
immigrants.
No, they're
commit
illegal
fewer
aliens.
crimes.
Let's use the right term.
No, let's
it's
use the right term.
illegal aliens.
Undocumented immigrants commit fewer crimes than native Texans.
Again, let's
You know,
call
I
them what
mean-
they are. They're illegal aliens. They came here illegally. They've stayed beyond the legal terms that they were allowed to be here, which by definition makes them criminal. So by definition, that's a crime.
That is not
So they
a
need to be
crime.
held-
It
yes,
is a civil
okay.
violation.
So let me let Senator
Which is
Haley
a
chime in
crime.
here.
No.
Senator Haley, tell me your thoughts here. A lot of people argue that labor prices for jobs low-income jobs that a lot of people don't want to do will suffer because of that. Do you agree with that?
Indeed, it will. Thanks first for having me on, Jared. I appreciate it. I did not hear the feed that went out. I was not able to hear it from this end. Glad to be on with you and certainly with my colleagues and friends, Dion and John. Thanks so much. Here's where we are with this. Does Kansas replicate, just in terms of the general topic of what we're doing with our communities that have an influx of people who are here who do not have citizenship? How do we displace? What do we do? Do we mimic what's happening out of the Trump administration? Do we augment them? Will Kansas be a party to that? I personally feel that for those communities like mine here in Kansas City, Kansas, which are beautiful in the diversity from people, irrespective of their citizenship status, should be very haltingly slow to displace families and communities where not only our economic development and stability lies heavily on that. I mean, many people are participating with our sales tax and our property taxes. They've renovated many neighborhoods, including mine in Kansas City, Kansas, and they are good neighbors. Now, for the criminals that John refers to, everybody's on board with that. I think the polls show we're all anxious to rid ourselves of those who have real crimes, not the civil crime necessarily of some time past that the statute of limitations may have run for coming to the country without documentation. But for those who genuinely have some kind of crime that can be attributed to them, they certainly would be ready to be deported, but not the solid citizens that are contributing to the well-being of our communities and our neighborhoods.
And that is what the administration is focused on, are the criminals. The only distinction I would make with what the senator referred to is there's residents, they're not citizens, and that's an issue that the federal government needs to resolve, find a solution. But in the meantime, the criminals need to go.
30 seconds, Diane. I'll give you 30 seconds more.
This whole thing is ridiculous. We are attributing criminal behavior to people who are not doing criminal behavior. Now,
But if they're not here legally, isn't that criminal behavior?
It's a civil violation. You can deport them, yes, but that is not a crime. But in any case, I mean, these are people who, take care of our children. They are people who clean our hotels. They are people who wash the dishes in the restaurants. They're people who sweep out our grain elevators. You want to do those jobs, John? Be my guest. But the thing is, what has been happening here is that they've taken a few high-profile crimes and extrapolated that onto millions of people who have done no crime other than being here without authorization.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you. I appreciate that, Diane. Renters concerned about the safety of their homes could invite local inspectors under legislation being discussed at the state capitol now. KAKE's Nick Nelson takes a look.
There was a strong sewage smell. I was there. The basement had anywhere between 6 inches and 12 inches of raw sewage, almost like a pond. There was mold that went up all 4 sides of the wall, at least 2 to 4 feet, black mold.
Lawmakers in Topeka Wednesday heard from Kansans about a bill that would allow city and county governments to inspect apartments and rental homes, like the one Representative John Alcala described, if the person living there complained about the condition of the home. Over the last few years, we've brought you a number of similar stories from here in Wichita.
Like, at any given time, this can get extremely out of control and people could die.
Right now, state law bans cities and counties from inspecting rental properties. This proposal from representatives from the city of Topeka would change that, but they're also suggesting an amendment to make it only applicable to the capital city, to make it more acceptable to groups that might oppose the idea.
We were talking to the lending institution, bankers association, community bankers, credit unions, as well as the landlords and the realtors associations.
Some state lawmakers expressed concern that the bill wouldn't do enough, even suggesting federal agencies should also be addressing the problem.
We're being asked to address a HUD problem that should be addressed through other venues. And so I'm concerned about our standing, so to speak, in addressing this problem. If this is a HUD issue, it seems that Topeka would not be the only city experiencing this issue.
So let me start with Senator Haley on this. Senator Haley, could you hear and are you familiar with this legislation regarding the tenant-renter relationship?
I could barely hear it, and I vaguely am not very familiar with a tenant relationship, or nor with that committee. And I barely heard the end of whoever was speaking. Sounded like a local representative from Wichita.
So the body of the legislation requires, or would allow renters to invite inspectors to come into their homes. Whether it's regarding whether the landlord would know about it, I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. Has this bill gone through the Senate yet?
It has not. It has not come through the Senate yet. It would probably be on our local government committee or maybe judiciary, where I sit. That's interesting, though, to think of a tenant to allow access to it. But for the purposes, there should be a general purpose for code enforcement of the suitability or habitability of any home. And if there is something that could be environmentally or structurally unsafe, anyone should have a certain level of access to that, whether they're a tenant or an occupant, or certainly the owner of the property. I don't know I do understand the concerns that a landlord who doesn't have a prime property or one in place may not want to have the local government intrusion, but at the same time, there's a public safety measure that's in place that perhaps should be explored further. But I'm sorry, I don't have some of the insight on this measure.
Understood. Dion, let me move to you. It seems like some of the pictures we saw in that package there seem like chronic problems that the landlord clearly isn't taking care of.
Yeah, several years ago, I was working on a story about natural gas prices, and I was in a person's home, and while I was there, the water heater fell through the floor. And fortunately, I was from California, and I know how to turn off the gas, or the whole place would have blown sky high. As I talked to the man about how he'd gotten to that place, it was a HUD voucher situation, housing and urban development voucher situation. So the landlord was getting for that basically substandard dwelling, he was getting paid by the tenant, who paid 30% of his income as rent, and the government, which made up the difference. It's a program that's administered. It is a HUD program, but it is administered by the city of Wichita. But so basically, they made up the difference in rent to the average price of a 3-bedroom home in Wichita.
So he was making money.
He was making a ton of money.
But not taking care of the maintenance.
And not taking care of the maintenance. And the other problem, though, is that people, can complain about these conditions, but if you complain, then you have to move out.
Right.
And they don't have first and last month's rent to move into any place else.
Yeah.
So it is a huge problem, and one that this bill would go a step toward addressing, but not nearly far enough.
John Whitmer, what are your thoughts?
The only thing that kind of stuck out to me on the particular legislation, I served as a freshman on local government when I entered the legislature, and keep in mind, when you enter the legislature as a freshman, you're still trying to find your way around the building. You don't know where the restrooms are. But one of the things that I learned is they typically don't like to do legislation geared towards one particular city, municipality. So when they said they wanted to target it towards Topeka in particular, that kind of stuck out to me. If they're going to do this, I think they're going to probably target it towards the state at large, because if you try and target a particular municipality, that creates problems.
Yeah.
I think they'd be better to try and do it statewide.
Okay.
Well, we have seen situations, though, where these things have been piloted in the community.
Right. Yeah, they could do it that way, yes.
On Thursday, Congress was briefed on the investigation into the deadly crash of Flight 5342 from Wichita to Washington, D.C. The NTSB now says new data indicates the Army helicopter was flying above its 200-foot ceiling when it crashed into the American Airlines jet. This week, the last of the remains were recovered from the Potomac River. 7 of the 67 victims were Kansans. The Wichita community continues to grieve and provide support for family and friends of those killed. Discussion has now started about creating permanent memorials to the victims, possibly at Wichita's Eisenhower National Airport or the Kansas Aviation Museum. Diane, tell me your thoughts here. Obviously, our community has been reeling about this, but now we start looking at moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a horrible tragedy for Wichita. One of the worst I've seen since I've been here. To have those skaters who delighted us during the figure skating championships be among the victims of this crash, and the local people that we've lost, and the hunting party from Maryland. It is just, it's heartbreaking. And yeah, I mean, moving forward, I hope we can. I hope we can put behind us the theory that this crash was somehow caused by diversity, equity, and inclusion, and move on to some serious solutions for air safety.
John Whitmer, tell me your thoughts.
Well, I hope it wasn't. We don't know. But, my reaction, first off, I want to commend Mayor Lily Wu and Congressman Ron Estes, Senator Marshall and Senator Moran, and just our community leaders. I happened to be in Topeka the night of the crash, and to see the mayor and Ron Estes and the way that they responded. I mean, Mayor Wu on CNN, the way she responded, the way she led and united this community, kudos to her. And I think we really showed Wichita pride, and the way we kind of rallied behind this. I think that showed some real class on her part, and I think kudos to her.
Senator Haley, chime in here. From a state lawmaker standpoint, how has the state been dealing with this tragedy?
Certainly for all of us, it touched not just Wichita, but all of us. Many of us are on the route back and forth to DCA, and really, don't our hearts go out? Haven't all of us thought, how close and near and dear all of them are? I think of the civil rights attorney who was on there, Kia Duggins from Wichita, who is going to teach at my alma mater, professor at Howard Law School in DC, and the climb that she had made to be there. And I was sad because I have good friends who are touched by this and saddened, and our hearts go out to them. I know they do all across the board. I think as we try to resolve how this doesn't happen again, or the takeaway from it, it was distressing to hear Senator Marshall make some what obviously is a ridiculous comment regarding DEI. I try to tie it in to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that only, quote, qualified white males could have done this job. As a very good friend of mine who is a Black woman who's been an air traffic controller for 20 years, she should be, and we should all be insulted, all of us, regardless of our race, regardless of our gender, to think that there is a niche that can hold any particular position. And, Marshall should have walked that back. He is completely out of line with it. To use a tragedy to move a narrow agenda that really has not caught on. It's kind of sad. And it does a discredit to Wichita pride and to Kansas pride as a whole. And I hope that we will get some recompense there. But our hearts continue to go out to the families.
Let me move on to John Whitmer. John Whitmer, 30 seconds to respond.
I don't believe that Senator Marshall said only qualified white males. I think there was some, I don't believe that's exactly what he said, but.
Okay, all right, we'll move on now. The Wichita City Council voted unanimously against allowing College Hill's Crown Uptown Theater to expand. The theater's owner says that was his only hope of staying in business. Cake's Lily O'Brien explains why the plan is a no-go.
At a time where people kind of question whether city government's listening to them, I think yesterday showed them that we are.
Brandon Johnson is one of the city council members who unanimously voted against a request to increase Crown Uptown's occupancy. Johnson says he's had maybe 3 constituents come to him in support of the request. The rest had major concerns.
Parking was one of those for sure. Safety concerns, congestion, not to mention that was one of the highest protests that I've seen on any case.
He says parking has been an issue in the College Hill neighborhood for years, and events at Crown Uptown already add to congestion.
You're nearly doubling what you can have now. I think it'd be a huge detriment to the neighborhood without some real plan of how to deal with that, and there was no plan presented.
The original Crown Uptown proposal request was to increase how many people could attend an event from about 850 to just over 2,000. The amended request, which is what City Council denied Tuesday, left the maximum occupancy up to the fire department. Johnson says per building code and the fire marshal, the capacity would have ended up being about 1,500. Multiple members of the Cake newsroom made attempts over the phone to contact Crown Uptown owner Mike Brown. He did not respond to any of those requests, but in previous statements shared he intended to tear the building down if he didn't get the increase approved, saying the theater is no longer economically viable as is. The city council thinks differently.
It's been economically viable up until this point. I know that there was some opportunities the applicant was looking at that may have made it more viable, at least for him, but I don't think it's a business model that loses.
So, John Whitmer, tell me what your thoughts are here.
Well, ironically, I was the director of sales for the Crown Uptown back in the day when Ted and Karen Morris owned the venue, so I'm intimately familiar with the Crown Uptown, and even Ted and Karen wanted to find a way to increase parking. I'm a property rights guy, so I would default to wanting to try and find a way to accommodate him, and maybe you don't get him 2,000 spots, maybe you find a way to get him to the 1,500. So I'm a little disappointed they didn't try and find a way to get him additional parking capacity because I'm sympathetic to him. I know the venue, I'm intimately familiar with it, I'm an event planner myself. I wish they had found a way to accommodate his needs without just saying no. Surely they could have found some way, but it's a problem, and I'd hate to see him close the venue.
Dion, being familiar with city politics, I was on the council myself in 2021. A parking lot about 3 blocks away, a business was granted permission to expand their parking lot about 3 blocks away just a few years ago. So why can't this business expand their parking lot?
Well, I mean, I'm a property rights guy too. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, if they can remodel this to where it can pass the fire code with more people, I don't see why it should be considered any differently than any other place. The city of Wichita has, they're starting to charge for parking. They're going to be trying to eliminate some parking, and basically, people who park will figure out a way.
Yeah.
And that's been a long complaint of the College Hill area for many, many years, of parking down the streets and in the alleys when events come around. So
Right.
this is a controversial issue for not only the businesses, but the residents who are often at odds with each other.
But I mean, who owns the streets? The residents or the citizens of Wichita? You know, I mean, it's just it doesn't seem. It seems to me like a problem that isn't. It seems to me like a solution in search of a problem. I think that people parking on side streets for public events is basically what the city has been pushing for, but I mean, it just I don't know, it just puzzles me that
it strikes me like they're using the mechanisms of the city to restrict the free market because they can. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not that familiar. I'm not on the city council, but it does seem to me like, look, the guy has a business. He wants to expand. Like you said, if he can make it work logistically with the fire marshal, I'm just disappointed they couldn't find a way to come to a compromise.
But let me ask you this: what about his threats to tear down the building?
Well, he owns the building. If he wants to tear it down, it'd be unfortunate because it's such a beautiful historic property. But hey, if he wants to tear it down and put up a lemonade stand, that's his right. It would just be really unfortunate.
Yeah,
it's his property. I mean, I think it's an empty threat. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Again, why couldn't we find an accommodation? It seems like the neighborhood's just so lockstep, and I would have hoped that his city councilman could have found a way to accommodate. I mean, you know Brandon. I don't know him that well, but
well, when you got people going, not in my backyard,
which happens a lot, especially in that community. That's a very tight-knit community, and.
Their citizens, by the way, are very engaged.
Very
more
much so, yes.
Than many other citizens. So, yeah.
And this is similar to what we've seen in Reno County, where they want to put up the wind turbines, where everybody likes the concept of a wind turbine until they want to put it out in a field within my sight range in my backyard.
All right.
It'd be a shame to lose that theater, though. It is a really nice
place. Very much. Yeah. And we'll leave it at that. That's a wrap for this week. Thank you so much to Dion Leffler, John Whitmer, and Senator David Haley for their analysis. And, of course, thanks to you for watching as well. Kansas Week at kpts.org. That's our email address. Reach out to us. Send us a question or comment. I'm Jared Cerullo. We'll see you back here next week.